Hello and welcome back to the Streaming and Waiver Wire podcast. I'm your host, Josh Shepardson, and you can follow me on Twitter where I post this at BChat50. And this week's ads are kicked off by a suggestion of grabbing a rookie quarterback with a soft schedule down the stretch, and that's Marcus Mariota. He's only 50% owned in CBS leagues, 43.1% owned in ESPN leagues, and just 42% owned in Yahoo leagues. And not coming off of a big game, but he had a tough matchup with the Carolina Panthers, one of the toughest pass defenses in the league in Week 10, and he certainly doesn't have any more matchups like that down the stretch. He faces the Jaguars in a Thursday night tilt this week, which I'm not crazy about using a rookie quarterback on a short week like that, but the matchup is good, and he also sees Jaguars again in Week 13. They're allowing the fifth most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, according to Pro Football Reference, and they were torched for 316 yards by Joe Flacco and a Kamar Aiken-led wide receiving core of the Baltimore Ravens in Week 10. So they are struggling. In addition to those pair of games against the Jaguars, also have matchups with the Raiders in Week 12, Patriots in Week 15, and Texans in Week 16, which in terms of allowing fantasy points per game to quarterbacks are all good matchups. The Raiders are allowing the 7th most, the Patriots are allowing the 13th most, and the Texans are allowing the 8th most, but that was prior to shutting down Andy Dalton in the Monday Night Football contest. So I would expect that they look a little bit better after that defensive showing, but he's a fringe starter. Mariota's a fringe starter from week to week. This week, because of the short week, but he'll be a startable option most of the rest of the year, especially if you're one of those owners that's dealing with Andrew Luck's injury. Perhaps you were an unfortunate Peyton Manning owner, which I would hope at this point you've cashed out, but you may have been looking for some options at quarterback since he's really started to stink it up, or perhaps you own some other quarterback options that are less than desirable. But Mariota should be flirting with top 10 to 12 fantasy point production totals here down the stretch. And in a perfect world, there is some upside that can be had with him potentially too. Haven't seen it yet, but perhaps Mike Mularkey opens up the playbook a little bit. Marcus Mariota, great runner in college, hasn't really utilized that at the NFL level yet. So if Mularkey's feeling a little bit more creative than Ken Wisenhunt, which isn't very difficult. Wiz wasn't exactly the most creative play caller there for the Titans. Perhaps you see them use his legs a little bit more, and that would certainly help his fantasy value here down the stretch. Next suggestion is for adding for long term for the remainder of the season is a guy that I featured last week whose ownership is going to skyrocket this week. Another injury to the Patriots. This time to Julian Edelman, going to cost him most likely the remainder of the regular season. Couple that with Deion Lewis's absence as a result of a season-long injury that I highlighted last week, and Danny Amendola becomes a must-add in leagues of all sizes and all scoring types. His ownership rate should balloon past 85-90% this week, unless there are enough lame duck owners in some of these leagues to keep that ownership rate down a little bit. But he's going to require a hefty fab bid or possibly the top waiver claim in leagues that he is available in. But he's worth that top waiver claim. He's also worth blowing the remainder of your fab budget on, because really the passing attack is now going to be Gronk, LaFell, and Amendola. Don't have a pass catching back worth much, and Amendola should own the short part of the field, while LaFell and Gronk are the deeper options for Brady. Not necessarily going to be a huge touchdown threat as a short pass catcher, especially with Gronk and even Scott Chandler being a big target in the red zone. He did catch a touchdown pass this past week. But Amendola is going to be PPR gold. And with the volume of work that he should receive, as long as he stays healthy, which has obviously been a problem for Amendola throughout his career, he'll have value in standard scoring leagues as well, because he's just going to get quite a bit of volume of work. This past week, targeted 11 times, led the team in targets, receptions with 10, and total 79 yards receiving, which was the second highest total on the team. So really like Amendola the remainder of the season, and looks like a strong play going forward. So go ahead and make a top claim on him. Moving on to the more widely available options for streaming this week, start with Mark Sanchez, who's owned in 11% of CBS leagues, 0.2% of ESPN leagues and just 1% of Yahoo leagues. Brock Osweiler was another quarterback who warranted some consideration from me. I think he's going to be the guy that's talked about more frequently this week. But the reality is we don't know what to expect from Osweiler. He was a second-round pick. He does not have much. He has no NFL starts and does not have much NFL regular season playing experience. Did have his best preseason of his career, and apparently most reports are that he has taken well to Gary Kubiak's offensive system, at least from what onlookers have seen in practice, at least onlookers that I trust in the Twitterverse, NFL media types and such. But that obviously remains to be seen how that's going to translate to meaningful NFL games. What we do know is that Mark Sanchez played well in Chip Kelly's system last year. He made 8 starts in 2014, averaged 277 yards passing per game while throwing for 12 touchdowns. He did throw 9 interceptions, so he was averaging more than an interception per start, but also rushed for 82 yards, which is roughly 10 yards rushing per game, but with 10 yards rushing being the equivalent of 25 yards passing in most fantasy leagues, basically you can compare him to statue quarterbacks and call him a 300-yard passer per game from a fantasy scoring perspective in Chip Kelly's offense last year. So guys like that aren't typically just floating around on the wire, and while it remains to be seen if he'll be leaned on that heavily, since they do have a stable of backs, including DeMarco Murray and Ryan Matthews and Darren Sproles, who give them some more balance. Sanchez has at least shown the ability to play well in Chip Kelly's offense. The Eagles are hosting the Buccaneers this week, and the Bucs are surrendering the 11th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. So certainly a plus matchup for Mark Sanchez this week. Moving on to running back, which is a very sad state of affairs. I mean, if you're looking for a running back on the wire, there is not much that is palatable that can just be scooped up for free in any competitive league, any league of 12 teams or more. But one option that did stand out is at least a viable plug and play this week if maybe you're dealing with injuries or dealing with some bye weeks. Theo Riddick is owning just 51% of CBS leagues, 30% of ESPN leagues, and 21% of Yahoo leagues. He's especially valuable in PPR leagues since he is the pass-catching back in that RBBC in Detroit, and has a good matchup this week. If you dig a little bit into the numbers, you'll see that the Raiders are tied for the 3rd most receptions allowed to running backs this year, and that's despite playing one fewer game than the Saints this year, and the Saints have only allowed 2 more receptions to running backs. So on a per game basis, the Raiders are allowing more receptions per game than the 2nd most allowed in the league by the Saints. So definitely a game for the pass catching back, and one that if the Lions are paying attention will be wise to utilize Riddick a little bit more. I mean, since the Raiders are so giving to opposing backs in the passing game, only makes sense to really utilize your best asset in that backfield as a pass catcher. And Riddick could see a little bit more work this week. Unfortunately, that's not a given. The Lions' offense has been bad this year, and doing what makes the most sense to score points doesn't seem to be on the agenda for them. He only played 17 offensive snaps last week. The Lions did win the contest and really seemed to be content just trying to salt the game away and keeping some of their other more productive runners out there, or at least more heavily utilized runners out there. But if things go according to plan, and this turns into a high-scoring and close game, then Riddick should have a more prominent role than the 17 offensive snaps he played last week. But there is risk there. Moving on to receiver, Wes Welker played in his Rams debut after signing earlier in the week last week. Only played a handful of snaps, was on the field for just 11 snaps according to Football Guys, but was targeted 6 times in those 11 snaps and caught 3 passes for 32 yards. You'd think with another week of learning the playbook, he would probably have a slightly expanded role, should see more than those 11 offensive snaps. Not sure what to make of the targets since we do have a quarterback change for the Rams. They will not be starting Nick Foles anymore. Case Keenum is now the starting quarterback, but considering Case Keenum's profile, not a guy with a big arm that's going to be stretching the field, you would expect maybe some shorter passes and working in some Wes Welker. Not a terribly accurate quarterback, so utilizing the short passing game to maybe bump that up would be wise on Keenum's part. But obviously, like I said, that remains to be seen. The real reason that I like Wes Welker this week, in addition to the fact that I do have a sinking suspicion that he'll get some short targets and get some cheap short receptions, is that he's facing a Ravens squad that are coughing up the most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers per game in 2015. So the matchup is literally the best you could ask for an opposing receiver. And if you're in a PPR format, I'd say 10 points is within reach for Welker. Something like 5 for 50 is not an outlandish expectation. Obviously not a huge effort, but if you're fighting through bye weeks or injuries, you take that sort of production, and the upside's a little bit greater than that. Obviously, he doesn't come without risk because he is tied to a bad quarterback and an offense that doesn't score a lot of points. But whether the game is in hand and they have to maybe utilize a short passing game to supplement or complement Todd Gurley in the running game, or whether they're playing catch-up, Welker should get at least some work this week as the underneath threat. Moving on to tight end, we got Charles Clay, who is owned in 60% of CBS leagues, 50.3% of ESPN leagues, and 41% of Yahoo leagues. Clay turned in 5 receptions for 52 yards in Week 10, which was considerably better than his last game, where Tyrod Taylor only threw the ball 12 times against the previous opponent, the Dolphins. But he actually bested his Week 7 and Week 9 totals combined. So snapped out of his funk, which is good for Clay owners or those who are looking to fill the tight end position. Was getting looks from Tyrod Taylor like we saw earlier in the season. This is more in line with what he was doing prior to Tyrod Taylor's injury. He did face the Patriots once this year. Was not a big effort. 3 receptions for 19 yards, but one of those was a touchdown grab. And with the Patriots serving as touchdown favorites according to Pinnacle Sports and at home, this game shapes up as one where the Bills could be stuck playing catch-up again early, as they were earlier in the year when the Patriots raced out to a big lead, and the Bills almost feverishly pulled off a surprising comeback. But with the Patriots hosting, with the Patriots playing with a chip on their shoulder, still undefeated, certainly have an offense capable of racing out to a big lead. And if that's the case, the Bills are going to have to air it out. Charles Clay is clearly the number 2 option behind Sammy Watkins in the passing game, which should leave plenty of touches for Clay, even if Watkins does get a heavy target load. Clay, certainly a viable tight end option if you're looking for somebody to start this week. Finally, the Baltimore Ravens are my cheap defense, or widely available defense of the week. 74% CBS ownership is the outlier here. Only 35% owned in ESPN leagues and only 43% owned in Yahoo leagues. Not a great defense by any stretch this year, but they are facing Case Keenum. And Keenum owns an ugly 55.2% completion rate for his career, owns a paltry 219.5 yards passing per game as a starter. Really not an NFL caliber starting quarterback, to say the least. The Ravens are at home hosting the Rams, and while the defense has struggled to force turnovers, and they do rank dead last with just 5, they have been able to dial up a pass rush, and they rank 8th with 24 sacks this year. So if they're able to force some pressure on Keenum, I would expect him to turn the ball over at least once. And if you're playing on ESPN or Yahoo leagues, there isn't a better defense that's under 50% owned this week. There are a few that are over 50% owned, but for the purposes of finding a team to stream that's widely available, Ravens look pretty good to me. That's going to wrap things up this week. Good luck in your contests. In the meantime, check out fantasyfootballcafe.com to see more podcasts throughout the week, as well as articles offering some advice to help get you over the hump. And of course, hop on the forums where they are active. A lot of discussion about roster building and drafts, draft and trade advice, and everything under the sun. Whether you're in a keeper league, in a redraft format, get on there, chat with the very active and very fun fantasy community available on fantasyfootballcafe.com. And until next week, good luck.